Hello and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Forensic Psychology. I'm Honorary Professor Dr. Geraldine Akerman and I'm the Chair of the DFP and I work as a forensic psychologist. And today we're really lucky to be having our first guest on, who's Dr. Nicola Bowes, and she will introduce herself and tell us a bit about herself. And today's episode is talking about the routes into qualification and how people might get into being a forensic psychologist, because this is something we've been asked to talk about. So I'll hand you over to Nick to introduce herself.
I'm Nick and I'm a forensic psychologist and I lead the Cardiff Metropolitan University route along with my colleague Karen de Clare. So I'll be talking a little bit about that.
So when we talk about the different routes, we often refer to what Nicola will be talking about as the Cardiff route. So when we give talks, that's what we often talk about. So Nick will talk a bit about how that started and how that fits into the different routes of qualification. So Kate's going to start off by talking a little bit about the doctorate route, which is one of the routes into becoming qualified.
So the first step is, that's really important, is that it's really important that you have an undergraduate degree in psychology, and that needs to be recognised by the British Psychological Society. One other thing that I should say is obviously we're very much talking about how to qualify in the UK. So if you are watching us from other countries, have a look in your own country, or similar to me, come over to the UK and kind of qualify here. But it's really, really important you have an undergraduate degree in psychology. Lots of universities offer that course. There are numerous universities across the country, so to have a look out for them. If you don't do your undergraduate degree in psychology, don't panic. You can also go on later on and do a conversion course into psychology. So that's the route that I took. So my undergraduate degree was actually in sociology and social policy. And then I then decided to go into psychology. So you can do a higher diploma that will give you the same qualification as an undergraduate degree. And then what's really important is to get the master's in forensic psychology. So that's at that point when you're starting to specialise into forensic psychology. And then you can then go on and embark on either the stage 2 route, which Emily's going to talk about in a little bit, the Cardiff route, which Nick will talk about. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the doctorate route. So there are lots of different kind of doctorates across the country at the moment. And one thing to bear in mind, that this isn't a PhD doctorate. So there are two types of doctorates that you can do in the UK. A PhD doctorate, which is pure research focused, or you can also do the practice doctorate in forensic psychology. And the practice doctorate is the only doctorate that will allow you to practice as a practitioner psychologist in the UK. So there are different universities that offer that. The two main ones are the Birmingham doctorate and the Nottingham doctorate. However, there are a couple of other universities that are also starting to offer that at the moment. So there are also within that, there are two doctorates that you can do. So you can do a core forensic one, or you can do a combined clinical and forensic doctorate. And Birmingham is the only university that offer that at the moment. So how the doctorate is set up is you can either do it full-time, which is usually about 3 years, or you can do it part-time, which is roughly about 4 years. One of the biggest benefits, I think, that of doing the doctorate was that you get lots of support with the university. So alongside getting different placement options and working in different settings, you also get support with the uni through research. You're allocated an academic supervisor, and you're also allocated supervisors to support you with your placement. So there's lots of options for support there. Within the placement, and I think one of the main reasons why I chose to do the doctorate is I was guaranteed to get experience in different settings. So I was really fortunate that I got to work in the community, I got to work in private practice, I got experience working in secure hospitals, and then also got experience working in prison service as well. So it was really, really, really good actually. So I absolutely loved it because you got such breadth of experience, but it is an intense 3 years. I kind of cut out all my social life for that 3 years, and so that was quite intense. One of the other benefits of it is, unlike the stage 2 route or unlike the Cardiff route, is because you're not employed by an organisation, you have a little bit more flexibility. So you don't have to negotiate some of the organisational demands or work demands that you have to do. You kind of have a little bit more flexibility. The downside of that is, in my experience, I think it was difficult for organisations to support me with training because I wasn't an employee, I was a student on placement, and so I didn't quite get the same opportunities in comparison to those who are employed. And I think one of the biggest challenges to think about the doctorate is it is self-funded. So not everyone has that opportunity to be able to afford that. The fees are really expensive. They're roughly about, just for the academic fees alone, are about 10,000 a year. So that it's not cheap. And then you also have to be able to fund, I guess, your living expenses, accommodation, bills, standard stuff. There are opportunities where you can get bursaries. So some employers have been really good with that in the NHS. I know the offender personality disorder pathway have been really thoughtful about that recently, which is fantastic. And they're starting to offer bursaries each year for those on the forensic doctorate. So you can have options there if finances are a bit of an issue. Just as a bit of a personal experience, I was really, really lucky that I had family who were able to support me with it. So my family were able to take out loans for me to be able to afford that. I will be paying that back until I'm about 50. So you do come out with a high level of debt. But for me, it was the best option in terms of the breadth of experience that I wanted, the attachment to the university, getting that lots of experience in research, and also coming out with a doctorate at the end. So what the doctorate will allow you is that you will become BPS chartered psychologist, but also a HCPC registered practitioner psychologist. So the HCPC is the Healthcare Professionals Council that gives us our qualification and registration to enable us to practice psychology in the UK. So any kind of health professional will be registered under this body, and the doctorate will enable you to become both BPS chartered and HCPC registered. To practice psychology in the UK, you do only need HCPC registrations. You don't have to have BPS chartership. However, there are lots of benefits for doing that. So you become registered with the organisation, there's lots of support, lots of opportunities for training and linking in with other professionals. And there are lots of different divisions or groups within the BPS that can be really helpful in terms of sharing knowledge. So if you are looking at a route that isn't BPS chartered, don't panic. Because the HCPC do align themselves with different guidelines, ethical guidelines that enable you to become a practitioner. So don't panic too much if you see a route and you think that's the route for me, but it isn't BPS chartered. You can also become BPS chartered later on in your career. So I shall pass you over to Nick now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the Cardiff route.
Fab. So there are different universities that offer a different approach to qualification. We're one of them. I think ours was the first university to offer a route that wasn't a doctorate route, but that followed an apprenticeship model, so kind of similar to stage 2, but built around it some support and the university structure, access to the university kind of processes, libraries, all that kind of stuff. So Cardiff isn't the only university offering that. There are others around the country. I know kind of in the northeast, in the south, and in the northwest as well. So have a look at all the different routes.
So could you say a bit then, Nick, about what's different in because Emily's going to talk about the sort of route to chartership through the BPS, British Psychological Society, but I wonder if you could say a bit about how Cardiff route is different.
Yeah, so we designed the Cardiff route following, I think, the HCPC took over being our regulatory body in 2009. Around about that time, we had a problem with our profession, really. Nationwide, we had a shortage of qualified forensic psychologists, and lots of trainees kind of stuck on the route. It was taking a very long time to qualify, and often people who were offering the supervision for that, they had lots of kind of work that needed to be done by a qualified forensic psychologist, but also offering lots of supervision to trainees who were just like trogging away through the stage 2 route. So the stage 2 route is the route that I qualified through. So there was a bit of a problem. And what was happening then with the shortage of forensic psychologists posts is that other professions were coming in and filling those. So we were shrinking and contracting as a profession. And around about that time, our university, we only had a master's programme. And so if anything, we were making the problem worse rather than better. We were kind of filling up the blockage at the bottom when actually we needed to deal with the issue at the top. So we designed the Cardiff route to try and address that problem, really. So to try to look at, can we add extra support and structure around the process to qualify in? The doctorate routes were around at that time, but we had concerns around that about how much they cost someone to do that, and how much it costs to support yourself doing that whilst you're undertaking study. So you have to pay the fees, and then you also have to find somewhere to live and food and all that kind of stuff. And what we found really was what's happening is perhaps there was a big gap appearing between the the social and economic experience of our service users and the people who were getting through the doctorate route, that we already knew that our practitioners and our service users had a big gap, and that if anything, the doctorates were like widening or broadening that gap. And we wanted to try to prevent that. So we designed a programme to try and keep the best options, I suppose the best parts of the apprenticeship route, but to build some structure to the process of going through that route. So we added teaching, so workshops, and when I did stage 2, there weren't any kind of workshops around, so we wanted to provide some teaching support. We provide someone from the university to work with each student, and they also have then a supervisor from their placement or their employer mostly. And so we have this like team of 3, the student, the academic supervisor who knows the route, and the clinical supervisor who knows the student and the task. And then together these 3 kind of work and plot towards qualifying. We've been running now since I think 2012. We had 5 students on our first cohort. And yeah, we've got a lot more than that now, somewhere around about 200, and around about 200 who've qualified, which is great.
So I think one thing people often ask is about how you choose between the different routes. So I think each one will have to be individual as to what route suits them best, doesn't it? And I think we'll talk in a minute about how what work experience you might have before we actually go into it. I think Emily's going to talk a bit now about the BPS route, working towards British Psychological Society training.
Getting to be a trainee was a long old journey, and I think I can recall sitting in the university lecture theatre thinking that I really wanted to be a forensic psychologist, but I had no idea how to get the experience. And I think that's a really common question that we get asked a lot about how can you get experience. It's such a catch-22 that you apply for jobs and you can't get the experience, and then you need the experience. So one of the things that I did was I worked for a charity in Exeter, where I went to university, and I did some volunteer work with there was a hostel nearby that housed people that had recently just come out of prison who had been convicted of sexual offences, and I did some work with the men, kind of integrating them back into society, and that was really helpful. It kind of got me an insight into the criminal justice system, and whilst it wasn't in prison, actually it kind of really helped me in thinking about how my communication skills and thinking about what there is to offer men that have come out of prison. And then as I was undertaking my masters, I worked as an honorary assistant working for the NHS. So again, this wasn't specifically forensic, but it kind of really helped me in thinking about the role of a psychologist. Painful because it wasn't being paid, but it really helped in thinking about assessments and the role that psychologists can play in a service. And then I finally got into prison, and I got a job as an interventions facilitator, and this was really helpful because it kind of got me, firstly it got me into the prison, and I think it was really helpful to have the job before becoming a trainee in the prison service, because you kind of get to know the prison lingo and the language, because let me tell you, there is a whole nother language there, and kind of thinking about the role that the organisation plays, like what's on offer, who's who, what happens. Kind of just a couple of years in that job really helped me in framing my thinking about what a psychologist does, and do I want to do that? And I absolutely did want to do that. So then I became a trainee. And before I talk about that, I just wondered about you guys on the call, like what about you? Did you have any other work experience?
So similar to you, I think that there is a lot of debate in psychology more generally at the moment about actually should or shouldn't we have to volunteer in order to get some work experience, and whether or not it should be paid. And I guess we're not going to go into that debate, but I think there is in some ways some of that volunteer experience is it's just so helpful, as you say, Emily, just to give you a bit of an insight into the work, to get to know actually what is it like to work with people or to work within teams. And so one of the things I did is I volunteered in Ireland with the Garda diversion programme, which is the Gardaí are the equivalent of the police in Ireland, and it was working with young people who are at risk of offending. And it was throughout a summer I did a few months volunteering there, and it was similar to you, it was almost like a mentoring role, and I did that. And the other thing that I did, which I think can be a really good tip, is even if you're really struggling to get that voluntary experience or to get that practice experience, think about your research projects that you're doing in uni and think about aligning them close to the criminal justice system. So when I was doing my undergrad, I did it in social policy, but I did it on the policy around female imprisonment in Ireland at the time. And that, I think doing that was really, really helpful. And similarly, when I was doing my HDip and my master's, I always aligned it close to like thinking about policies around offending or thinking about offending behaviour, and that demonstrates that actually your motivation and passion to get into forensic psychology. And then there's also lots of opportunities, I think, with assistant psychology roles, particularly around in the NHS and in the offender personality disorder pathway. And there are lots of opportunities out there. So it's just about thinking a little bit creatively about trying to get your foot in the door. I think you'd say the same, Jerry and Nick, actually, about trying to just think outside the box sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I volunteered as well alongside doing my master's. So my master's was part-time and it was distance learning. So I did a day a week in a local prison, which was invaluable experience. But that is the trouble. People can't always afford to do it. But we had a person who'd come to volunteer in the prison I was working at the time, and she had a part-time job at the weekend in a shop. And then a job came up in the prison working in the visit centre at the weekend. And so she was getting paid more than she would have been paid in the shop, but she was getting relevant experience. So look around for those sort of jobs. So there are charities that will employ people to work in those hours. And so they're often hours that will fit in around a university. And most people at university have to work as well. So you might as well get a job that's relevant. So really be creative about what jobs might be relevant. Lots of hospitals might have shifts even as a sort of and actually we're now seeing, which I haven't seen for years, assistant psychologists posts being advertised again, which I literally haven't seen since the beginning of my career, which is how I started. So yeah, these jobs are around. So look on the alerts, look on the government websites, NHS websites, and be creative. I think like Emily, going into hostels, there'd be lots of places. It's just looking around and thinking and asking for advice, because we're happy to give advice. How did you get in, Nick? How did you start out?
Well, like, it's really interesting listening to you guys, because it feels like you've always wanted to do that or known what you wanted to do, and I feel like I haven't been like that. You know, I still don't really know what I want to be. So like I left school at 16. University wasn't on my horizon. Wasn't in my consideration at all. Like I finished school, get a job. So I got a YTS. I worked for British Gas for years, and it was only when I was older, my gran had Alzheimer's, and at the time I just thought, gosh, like this is horrific, and also like, what's going on? Why isn't someone solving this problem? And realised I probably needed some qualifications if I wanted a voice for that. So I left, I took voluntary redundancy when I was about 21 or something, and went back and did both A-levels and then a degree, and you're always intending to go into clinical psychology and look at dementia and work with older adults. I suppose my background had been much more forensic though. So my background then, I was doing youth work as well in areas of social deprivation around Wakefield, which is my hometown. And I think one of the things that perhaps like I hadn't clocked at the time, but working with young people who lived on one of the estates in Wakefield, and particularly around a little lad called Ben, whose dad had got a criminal history, and had just started sending Ben burgling because he can get through the little windows. And then just one Friday evening, kind of arriving to do the youth work, and then this little lad, Ben, who's 5, walking down the street with a can of beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and just I suppose caused me to think more broadly about social issues and and challenges that children might face in an environment like that. And what we often now see as a practitioner, kind of, adverse childhood experience has been so prevalent, and trauma so prevalent in the work with the residents that we work with. So I suppose like my path was much more meandering. I think by chance or by luck or by providence, I've got so I was less kind of planned in my pathway.
I left school at 16 with no qualifications, or just GCSEs, but then I didn't go into it until I was older, after I'd been a caterer. So I think actually that was probably right for me, because some of the things we listen to can be really harrowing, and it can be, the work can be distressing at times, and I think I needed to be a bit older and a bit more life experience before I went into the job. So I think that was probably the right thing for me. But I started studying later in life as well, and I had to do qualifications before I could go to university. So I think everybody goes in different routes, and actually it's really interesting when they're looking at the membership of the British Psychological Society, and there's lots of people that have got an undergrad degree and have not ever gone in to do any further, but they still stay members, and so any of those at any time could decide, actually I'm going to take another step, but it doesn't have to be earlier in your life. You can literally do it any time. And we're always trying to encourage more diverse people into the and particularly men as well, because we've got very few men. And you mentioned about the gap between the people we work with and the people who we are, and that's a big gap as well. So we often overrepresented by white women and underrepresented by people from other diverse communities, and also less men coming into forensic psychology. So it's all interesting. We don't know why that happens, and it's a question I often ask, but we don't know. So probably
a really important point to make about diversity, that we're from a position of significant privilege, aren't we? Because we're all white. It's not it. So that diversity here is prevalent in it's represented in our profession, and I think there's lots of work being done to address that. But I think we have to own that we are systematically and structurally racist. As is our profession, and the structures that operate around our profession. It's certainly something to be aware of, to own, and to start addressing.
So Emily, did you want to say a bit about the stage 2 route then through the British Psychological Society?
Yes, absolutely. So I am employed by the prison service and as a trainee, and when I became employed, I was given the option to pick which route I would like to qualify, and I was given the BPS stage 2 route and the Cardiff route to choose from. Some organisations will also pay to do the doctorate route, but for me that wasn't an option. I picked the BPS stage 2 route. When asked why, I couldn't give you a solid answer why. I think that when I did my master's at Portsmouth, the BPS stage 2 route was talked about so often that I just became very focused and set, and I was like, that is what I have to do. So that, I think, was my driving force. I kind of set out my plan, and that's what I wanted to do. The BPS stage, so I've been on the stage 2 route for about 18 months now, and the qualification requires you to undertake a minimum of 2 years supervised practice at work, and the idea is you have experience in your role. So you are a trainee in the prison service, and you have to prove your competence in 4 specific areas within your role as a trainee. So these 4 areas, you have core role 1, which is an assessment and intervention; core role 2, which is research; core role 3, which is communicating with other professionals, which is sometimes referred to as a consultancy piece of work; and core role 4, which is training. And as part of the qualification, you have to do 2 pieces of work which are referred to as exemplars, and you do these 2 pieces of work within those core roles, and you submit them for assessment of competence. And that is simply it. That sounds very simple. It absolutely isn't that simple. Just simple, just do that. So you're also, alongside that, you are working so you're employed, so you're actually a trainee in the prison service. So that can be a real challenge, in that you're trying to manage your qualification and prove your competence and do all the work alongside also being an employee. And that can be quite difficult, because you're trying to sort of find work within your daily work that could also work alongside your qualification. So I doing assessments on some of the men that on the wing, I'm like, brilliant, I can reflect on the process of doing this assessment and how that can show my competence. But then there will be times when you need a piece of work, so I need to train staff. At the moment I'm looking for a piece to train staff, but there's no opportunities for me to train staff. So that can be really difficult, and then the minute something comes up like a golden nugget, you just have to grab it. But that is definitely a challenge, I think, of being a trainee and also being employed. The benefit obviously is that you're being paid, and that is fantastic, but there is the difficulty there in managing time and managing your resources. You have to also be supervised, so I think typically before I think Nick, you referred to it as well, like, there's been some times when the BPS route hasn't perhaps had the best light shone on it, because there were lots of people that weren't able to, they were kind of stuck and they weren't moving anywhere. And I think the qualifications team have made a few changes to make it a bit clearer, and the candidate handbook that you get now is much more structured in how it's laid out and the areas that you need to hit, and that has made people going through the BPS route, it has sped things up and made it a bit of a smoother transition, and things are a lot clearer, but it is much more of a self-guided route. You are supervised by people in your work, and also you have a supervisor of the BPS, which you can access. There are times when you can have appointments with them and talk with them, but it is much more a self-guided process of learning.
Having supervised people on the Cardiff route and the DFP route, the Cardiff route is slightly more structured in that way. You have regular meetings and you have to have things done by the next meeting, and that's really helpful. Some people really like work in that way. And I think it's also important to say, so to become a forensic psychologist, you have to be supervised by people who are chartered forensic psychologists or HCPC registered forensic psychologists. So you can have designated supervision on different aspects by other people, but you do have to have a supervisor who's qualified in forensic psychology.
One thing that I think, like Kate, when you were talking about the doctorate and having placements, I do love that idea. Like, you get such a breadth of experience in lots of different places, and I think being employed, and so I'm currently in one prison, trying to find how I can hit those core roles in my role is quite difficult. I've tried to sort of be a bit creative about it and picking different supervisors for my different core roles, so that I'm learning from different psychologists, and that really is helpful. So you have one overall supervisor as your coordinating supervisor, and then you can have designated supervisors, and I definitely would recommend doing that rather than just having the same one. You can learn so much from different people. Like, even just on this call, we've got so much experience, so picking different supervisors is a really definitely would recommend doing that.
I was just thinking, Emily, just to link in with that, I wondered if another good tip is, even if you might be based in one organisation, maybe move around the organisation, or maybe work on different wings or work on different units in the hospital to get that experience. So yes, although you might have breadth of experience in a doctorate, because we're required to have a different experience in really different settings, and maybe it might be just reaching out to your supervisor and seeing, actually, is there an option for me to go and do a risk assessment in the open prison down the road, or is there an option for me to do a risk assessment or present in a mental health tribunal for a person from another unit. So I think you can get really creative. So I think there are different options, because I think there's so much breadth even within organizations within psychology, and as a forensic psychologist, and what you might do. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to lose out, or it might mean actually when you qualify, you go and work in different settings as well to try and get that experience.
And I was going to suggest as well to not forget your peers. So, our chaps, we try and buddy people across. So if someone's in a justice setting, we try to buddy them with a student who's in health, or vice versa, so that you get, so you buddy up and you're talking about your learning, but you're talking in your own context. And so there's a lot of shared learning there across your peer group. That's really, really helpful, I think. And you're both learning the same kind of competencies, but they're applied very differently and have a very different environment or expectations from the environment around them. So that's really helpful as well, the peer learning. Everything
we learn is relevant to us being qualified, and we're always learning as qualified psychologists. So
I also think you're saying about reaching out, there's definitely a fear about reaching out. It's for a trainee, perhaps, I speak for myself, but like getting in touch with somebody that's qualified, or getting in touch with somebody that you haven't worked with before. You're like, oh God, I can't get in touch with them. Like, I'm just a trainee, or what will they think? Like, if you want an opportunity. But my experience of doing it is, people love the fact that people want to get to know you and get to know about your service and want to help. So I got in touch with somebody about doing some research that I was really passionate about, really anxious about doing it. It was someone really high up in the prison service. And then she got in touch and she was like, this is fantastic. I'd love to work with you. I was like, oh my goodness, how wonderful. People want to work and, collaborate. And if you're enthusiastic and you're excited about something, go for it. Don't hide away from it. I definitely think reaching out is a fearful thing, but try and overcome the fear, because it's totally worth it in the end.
Yeah, I think forensic psychology particularly is very warm and welcoming. Like, I don't know why it is like that, but it is. It's evident at the conference, and it feels like one big family. I think you're exactly right. It's something that's really special about our profession, I think. If we look at other practitioner psychology professions, like, I think we're the friendliest. I do. Yeah, I don't know why that is, but I think that it's dead right. People seem to be really helpful and willing to give their time to learn, to grow. Everyone's just keen to grow and learn.
I mean, that's one of the things I love about the job, is how adaptable it is, and how you can catch an idea and go with it, and do a piece of research and work with people. We watched a programme one night about, just happened to be on television, about children visiting prisons, and it was something I'd never thought about, how it was for the children to visit prisons and the questions they asked and what they thought about their mother or father who was in prison. And when I went into work the next day, the residents were talking about it and how impactful it had been on them. And so they decided, actually, we'd love to do some research on what it's like to be a father in prison. And this piece of research just came very organically from watching that programme, but really made us all think about, how it is for people coming into the prison setting, because as Emily said, it's quite daunting to go into it. It's a different language, and visitors come, and it's very painful for them to come to visit prisons at times. And so really gave us a different focus. But it was a fascinating piece of work. I mean, it's additional to your everyday job, but it was fascinating. I learned such a lot by doing that. So there's days like that where you just get an opportunity, and it led to a lot of other things, but it was so helpful. So I think the variety in the job is fascinating. I work with Nick as a visiting lecturer at Cardiff Metropolitan University, so having that sort of connection is really helpful. And one of those things we wanted to do for people who were trainees was that they would link to a university so that they could do their research with a practitioner, so you've got those connections. So we always encourage those sort of things. So if you've got a piece of research you want to do and there isn't someone specialist in your field where you're working, then reach out to universities, because they always want to do research. So use those links sort of across the different practices, areas of practice, because there's so many areas of practice for forensic psychologists, and they always want to work together. So do that, and just be creative and ask. And if people say no, that's fine. There's someone else will say yes.
Because there's such breadth to our work around assessments, treatment, research, training, consultancy. I never have 2 days that are the same. And so that really kind of keeps my interest going. So I kind of so I work in a prison with young adult men at the moment, and also do some private practice. And literally one Monday and Tuesday can look totally different. So I go into the prison and I think, well, something might have happened that I might need to respond to, or, I might need to, have extra space for the team. I might be doing some supervision of junior staff, or supervision of operational staff, and I really, really love that. And I also think there's something about working within a team. So I love working within a team with other people. I don't know if you guys are the same, but I love working with prison officers. I love working with other therapists. I think that helps improve my practice and how I work. And I love working in times and opportunities I get to go lecture at the universities, in other universities. So that's something that I really, really love.
What I really love about our profession, and what I really love about hearing our students, is they, really engaged in things like an ethical autobiography. So what do I bring to this scenario, and what is it about me that I need to be aware of when I'm doing my job? So we work at the university, so I get a chance to do a little bit of research, and really thinking about where our profession, I think, should be going, which is around prevention and really influencing policy and law. It's something that I think as forensic psychology we've left behind. Like we should be a really loud voice when people are starting to develop law. We're thinking about behaviour that crosses the law, and we need to be really careful about how laws are formed, because otherwise that, it perpetuates a problem. I think forensic psychology really have brought about a lot more fairness, procedural justice, rehab culture. That's really been pushed forward, obviously by lovely Ruth Mann, but then also like the army of forensic psychologists, and policy like Joe Bailey and the whole team have really pushed that forward and made justice settings, in many ways, I talk about this with clinical psychologists, in many ways more trauma-informed in their approaches than some health settings. So I think we've made some good strides forward, but there's a way to go, isn't there?
So we've talked a lot on here about our roots in and how we might become psychologists, and we'd always welcome people getting in touch with us and asking questions, and only leaves me to say, let's talk forensic psychology.